so excited because we have none other than the great, the inspirational, the role model, the queen, Joy Reid, here on the TDG Take podcast. Joy, thank you so much. And she's here. She's right here at Taradell Group in the office, in the flesh. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited, as you can tell.
Tara, it is so great to be here. It is so great to be actually with you in the office.
Yes.
We love it.
I love it. So let's get right into it because people are very excited. They know you're on today. And so we did a little something. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about you, Joy. You personally, everybody knows you. You're the host of your eponymous show. We know you for taking it to the Republicans. We know that side of you, but people don't really know Joy Reid personally, right? And who you are. I do because you're my friend.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more about yourself and your story, right? And how you got to where you are. But let's start a little bit with you personally, Joy Reid.
Well, that is a very big, broad question.
Yes.
Basically, I am a super nerd. I am a history buff. I'm an architecture geek. Like, I love stuff like that.
That I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm an architecture geek. And I'm sort of an accidental journalist. I did not start out wanting to be, on TV or be a journalist or anything like that, other than wanting to be a writer. I've always wanted to be a writer, and that's sort of my fundamental thing that I am, that I consider myself to be a writer, even before being a journalist. When I was a kid, I grew up in a family with a single mom who was Guyanese, American, Caribbean. Caribbean people, they want their children to be one of three things: a doctor, a lawyer, or an architect. So there are three of us, and so we each said, one of us said doctor, I said doctor, my sister said lawyer, my little brother said architect. So my mom was like very, very happy right with that. But once you're in, you're kind of locked in. But really what my passion was, I got really sort of fixated on news when I was in about 6th grade. I'm aging myself, but weirdly enough, it was the Iran hostage crisis that got me addicted to news. I asked my mom if I could stay up to watch this fascinating thing that happened, that these Americans got kidnapped. They're in Iran, and I was just sucked into this show that eventually became Nightline. And my mom was like, yeah, you can stay up and watch that because it's informational. Right. Stay up and watch it. And then I wound up staying up and watching the news and watching Nightline every night from then all the way until I graduated from high school with my mom. Wow. But she also had a passion for news and information. I would watch the Sunday shows, other than sports, like, right. Or like, Gilligan's Island. Like, I was watching the news and I just was fascinated by it. But I never thought that would be a career for me because I was already committed to, I'm going to be a pre-med, I'm going to be a doctor. And that all kind of was working the way it was working until, at age 17, my mom unfortunately passed away right before I started at Harvard. I was going in as a pre-med, but that did not last long. I had a really rough freshman year. I actually ended up taking a year off, and I had to kind of reassess what I wanted to do with my life. I definitely didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't have a lot of faith in medicine, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was just, dealing with a lot of depression and a lot of undiagnosed depression and trauma. Right. So I moved back to New York. I was born in Brooklyn, but I was raised in Denver, Colorado. So I moved back to Brooklyn, lived with my auntie, and just was reassessing my life. And this was at a time when, Brooklyn was like Brooklyn Bohemia. It was Black Bohemia. It was, it was where Spike Lee was. Right. It was where creatives were. Right. And I lived with my aunt until, the 4 and 5 nights of church, a week were a little much for me. So I moved out. And I ended up living in Fort Greene, and I was right in the middle of Black Bohemia. Right. And by the time my year off was over, I had changed my whole plan, and I decided I wanted to be Spike Lee. So I switched my major to the equivalent of a film major at Harvard, which is called Visual Environmental Studies, and that was it. I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. And when I got out of school, that also sort of took a turn, because I wound up taking a job at School of Visual Arts where I met Jason, who my husband, and this whole crew. And I was like, I'm going to form a little collective crew. We're going to go out to LA and we're going to make movies. That didn't happen. Instead, we wound up making a show called Video Dubplate, which was a reggae music video show. It's the craziest story ever.
I love it.
So we wound up doing this show that we won little awards for it. We got to meet all these celebrities. We were backstage at concerts. Suddenly we're doing a music video show, which made absolutely no sense. We're up against like MTV and all these other shows, and we're just at, you know, Channel 25 in New York City. But it really created.
Oh, I know Channel 25.
That was our station, and we did
Okay.
really well. And it was just this thing where I fell in love with production. I fell in love with, you know, I was the producer. Jason was the director. We had a news podcast that we would like put in the middle of it. So we had a little news and information in between the music videos. And it just was this really incredible sort of 3-year adventure.
Okay.
And so when we, you know, got pregnant for the second time and wound up moving to Florida, I was like all over the place, you know. I had done all these different jobs, none of which were pre-med. I was so far from it. And so I decided to just take a job that would be fun, that would be, you know, be my passion. And so we got to Florida. I wound up taking a job at the Fox affiliate in Miami, WSBN, the Plex, as a morning show producer. I was an associate producer. So basically I was pulling all the tape, writing the kicker at the end of the 5 o'clock a.m. broadcast. And then from there wound up at WTVJ, the NBC affiliate, where I worked until I quit because I was against the Iraq War. It's really crazy. I mean, the story makes absolutely no sense, but I did news until the Iraq War drove me out of news. And I just thought the jingoism, all of it was too much for me. I hated
You didn't want to promote it.
And I didn't want to promote it. So I wound up actually quitting and working on a political campaign. So my zigzag went from, you know, music videos to news to politics. And this was the 2004 campaign. Bush lost. Bush won. Bush won. And
I wish he had lost.
That was the goal.
We wish.
But our little sort of outside PAC that I was working for, you know, we tried to help poor John Kerry, but he didn't win. But it sort of ignited my passion. I was like, this is bringing together the things I care about. I was a press secretary. I was involved in something I was really passionate about, trying to get George W. Bush evicted from the White House. And some of those same people that worked on that campaign wound up working on the Obama campaign, which is how I wound up on a winning campaign. And when you were on a winning campaign, it's a whole different vibe.
It's a very different vibe. It's a vibe.
It's a vibe, as you know. And so you just, you know, through all the sort of things I did, like in between doing talk radio and doing other stuff that was sort of in the media world, I kind of had a mix of skills that NBC thought, you know, we want her back. So they brought me to New York to be the managing editor at thegrio.com. And that is how I wound up there. It was Barack Obama winning the election that made me like a pundit people wanted to talk to. And because I had done some talk radio and I had done some press secretary work and I understood politics, they were like, she's valuable, bring her back. I wound up working at the Grio, and kind of the rest is history. I would fill in for Chris Matthews and fill in for Chris Hayes and fill in for everyone. And Liz Harris Perry let me fill in. And I filled in enough that they gave me a show. So it's been like a weird journey that made literally no sense. Like when you tell it, I'm like, it sounds crazy, but it's kind of all accidental.
I would actually argue it makes a lot of sense. Because I think, so one of the things we want to do with this podcast and are seeking to do with this podcast is really give people practical advice and tips and some inspiration, right? And that's why I wanted you to be our first guest, because you are an inspirational person. You're someone I look up to and admire.
Oh, thank you.
And so I think you followed your passion. So every step of the way for me was about you doing things that you felt would give you fulfillment and joy, right? And then finding those things that you could get paid, right? Because we love fulfillment and joy,
we do,
but it doesn't pay the bills.
That is correct.
But you were looking to find things that gave you fulfillment and joy, and you weren't so focused on, my takeaway from this is you weren't so focused on making sure it made sense, right? It was about making sure you enjoyed it and that you derive value from it. And I think that's a really good takeaway for folks that are listening or watching, is that you know, sometimes things don't make sense in a societal way. But if they give you fulfillment and joy, they probably will ultimately lead you to something big and special, especially if you put your heart and soul in it. But obviously it has to make dollars and cents, but it just doesn't have to make other types of sense. But yeah, so I feel like there is a real through line between everything you say. Right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think the other piece of it is having the right inspirational figures in your life, right? You know, my mother and I were very, very close, but she was also like an adventurous person. And so we were kind of raised with this spirit of adventure. You know, we would do endless road trips. We drove all over the United States. We went to Utah even one summer. You know, we drove to California. We drove to San Francisco. We drove my sister to school when she went to Brown. We were just like road trip people. We spent a summer when I was 13 in Oaxaca, way down the bottom in Mexico. Wow. You know, we were traveling like a little traveling roadshow before, you know, and so I had this sort of lack of fear. Right. And so because I'd grown up that way with that kind of a mom, I just felt like you just take a chance and you'll figure it out. And I also had the confidence to say, you know what, I'll just try this. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else. And I know I'm, you know, basic intelligence, I can figure things out. And I've always kind of leaned on the fact that I am a good writer. I know I can make a living writing somehow. Right. And that, you know, I think once I got out from under the burden of my family expecting me to be a doctor, I think that's the first thing, is the expectation other people have of what they think you should do will hold you back and make you miserable. I mean, I was miserable being a pre-med.
That's a word. You just said a word.
Right? It's like you want to do something that you actually, it doesn't feel like work because you love it.
Right.
And so all of the job, and also having the right partner, because you know Jason.
Oh, I know, yeah.
He's a Taurus, so he's kind of grounded, and I'm a Sagittarius, so I'm like, woo!
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so,
same vibe. Same vibe.
And we've been around y'all, so I know it's the same vibe. You have to have one person that is a bit grounded, and he, you know, was always willing to hold it down. When I would say, I think I'm quitting my job, he would say, okay, we'll figure it out. You know, even though we had 3 little kids. And so I was able to have the freedom because I had the right partner. And I'll do the same for him. You know, it's like we are the kind of couple that is like, we're willing to take the adventure together and take the risks to do things that we love.
Yeah, and so, I mean, there's so many jewels that I'm like, which jewel do I pull and highlight? But the expectations thing, right? Yeah. So many choices I think that people make are based on expectations, and then they're miserable, right? Yes. Because they're choosing to conform to other people's expectations for them rather than their expectations for themselves. Yeah. So I think that's the other through line through what you said, is that you said, there's this expectation that people have of me, but I'm going to choose the other path, right? And look at you now, right? Yeah. And then I think the right partner. Like you, I spend some time doing some talking to young women and things like that. Oh, I cannot. I absolutely cannot underestimate the value of the right partner and waiting for the right partner if that right partner isn't there. Because if you are a person, like you said, if you're a person that's an adventurous person, you do need someone that's going to be a counterweight for you, but also that's not going to stop you or try to restrict you. Yeah. Yeah. So those are some of the jewels that I'm already hearing from the great wise Joy Reid.
Well, I mean, and to be honest with you, and the video double plate experience, it was one of the most fun times we had together. And at that time, we were friends. You know what I mean? So having a partner who's actually your homie, because we were a crew of like 6 Black people. And the thing that was so amazing about that experience is that wherever we would go, whether we're interviewing like Shabba Ranks, you know, or backstage with Mary J. Blige, and it's like all of these people back in the day, we would usually be the only Black people there. Wow. And so a lot of these Black artists would see 6 Black kids in the same little, because, you know, we were marketers. So listen, I knew Tear Down Down before I knew Tear Down Down. And I was always thinking like a marketer, but it was like, we got these jackets made because we were like, we're going to look like a crew, right? So we had our little video double plate jackets, and so they would spot us. We were very visible because, you know, 6 young Black people with cameras walking around backstage. People come to us. And so we got interviews we probably wouldn't have gotten as, 20-year-olds walking around with all these experienced crews because they would see us and they would want to come to us because as Black artists, they were like, we want to know you. We want to know who you are. We want to talk to you. We want to help you. And so we got a lot of boost from that. And so I think it was thinking about how do you sort of brand yourself. We had a brand. And so artists knew us. It was funny. I ran into Shaggy a few months ago. I was checking into the hotel and Shaggy was there. I haven't seen Shaggy in 20 years, but like we remembered each other. You know what I mean? Like of course I remembered him and Shaggy, but he remembered me. It was like it's a thing where we kind of made an impression. Wow, on people. Yeah, because we were so unusual and we were willing to really put ourselves out there.
That's it. So you bring me to some of the other questions that I have for you, because you said the B word. So obviously, run a marketing firm, a PR firm, branding, right? Yes. So you have a brand. So it sounds like from the very beginning, you understood the power and the importance of branding. So if you could share 2 or 3 tips with our viewers and listeners on how you built your brand or or just how you think the most effective way is to build a brand, right? A personal brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say. I don't know that I consciously was building a brand. I always, as the producer on that show, I was always trying to think about how to sell it and how to make it happen. But for me personally, in building myself, I think I built my brand kind of accidentally by leaning into what was supposed to be a negative about myself, right? You know, I'm a nerd, and I'm, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, I'm Generation X. So that necessarily wasn't a cool thing that, you know, that people were actually, you know, gravitating toward when I was in school. And so people be like, you know, you're a nerd. I had my little Coke bottle glasses. I had the whole thing. But I just decided at one point, you know, I would complain to my mom about it. She's like, you know what? Don't let anybody ever bring you down. You know, she was a really good cheerleader for it. And, you know, and I had my little family crew that was my cheerleaders. We had cousins, our cousins from Brooklyn used to come every summer. And so we looked like a little gang in the summer, you know what I mean? So it was like a bunch of us, you know, our little 3 Brooklyn cousins and us 3, kind of give you a lot of confidence. It helps if you're a nerd if you're from Brooklyn. Because when you do the whole thing in class where everybody says, where you from? And I say Brooklyn. They're like, maybe we shouldn't fight her because we really don't know. And she has this little gang of Brooklyn kids that come every summer. So I kind of leaned into it. But I also leaned into my nerd brand. I just decided, you know what? Yes, I am a nerd and I'm proud of it. And that's kind of who I am. And that is a core part of my brand, even to this day. The second thing is leaning into the thing that you're good at. I know I'm a great writer. Like, I know that if nothing else, I can make a living. I'll write columns, I'll write articles, I'll write books, I'll teach writing. And so figuring out like what your core skill is and then just boosting that and pushing that. And that's kind of like, my brand is I'm a nerd, I'm a writer, and also preparation. Like, right, I'm a research person. So it's like, if I'm gonna go on television, I know I'm gonna know my stuff. I know I'm gonna have my facts. I know I'm gonna have my producers dig in and make sure I know what I'm saying, know what I'm talking about. Because you can have all the confidence in the world and be strong and wrong and not know anything, but when people dig into it and look a layer deep, they realize that you're paper thin. So I think for me, it's always been, I'm gonna show up prepared. I'm gonna be a little nerd and I'm gonna be very proud of it, right? And I'm just gonna lean into the fact that I know that my core skill is strong and I always keep it up. I try to write a little bit every day, whether I'm writing just something in a journal, just something to keep my skills going. And so that's kind of the way that I've built my own personal brand.
Wow, that was great advice, and thank you for that. Especially leaning into the thing that would be a negative, because that's what we tell you and we tell political candidates to do, right? Like, don't let them make that a negative. Lean into it. Take that away from them, right? And so I think that's just perfect advice, especially around branding, right? Because there's a line, and I don't philosophically align with Jeff Bezos, but there is a line, a quote that has always resonated with me is, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's right. So,
and the thing is that sometimes the things people are saying about you when you're not in the room, to your point, it is a negative thing, but you can't flip it. You can't spin it. You know, Joe Biden, I'll give you a perfect example. Joe Biden is an old fella. Now, people have made that a negative. I truly don't understand why that in and of itself would be not a reason to vote for someone, but okay, because he seems perfectly sensible. But when Joe Biden goes out publicly, he leans into it. He says, you know, I'm only 118 years old. And everybody laughs, right? He'll lean into the fact that he's got certain, you know, sort of foibles about himself, but he actually makes those work for him. People called him Dark Brandon behind his back, or called him Brandon behind his back to try to make that a negative. He said, Dark Brandon, I'm gonna put the crazy laser eyes on him, I'm gonna lean into it. Or Barack Obama, who we both know is brilliant at branding and brilliant at creating a personal brand. People said Obamacare was negative. He said, no, it's not. Obamacare is good. And now what does everybody call it?
Everybody calls it Obamacare. And when the fight to take it away happened, people said, you're not going to take my Obamacare. My Obamacare. Exactly.
That's correct. So it's like, it's all about flipping that negative.
So speaking of brands, what many people may not know is you're also an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about your production company and how that came to be. And also, how are you made? I'm throwing all these questions at you, because I had you right. I'm like, I have her. But how? So wait, you know, I'm gonna stick with the first 2 questions. Tell us about the production company, and I'm gonna suppress my zeal to throw all the things at you, everything, everywhere, all at once. But tell us about your production company and how that came to be.
So when we were doing the aforementioned video dub plate, that show, we created a production company for that, which was called Aisle One Productions. And so Jason and I created this company, and that kind of went by the wayside with the show. But we were like, we still want to have a production company because there's all of these things that we want to do.
Right.
When I studied film at Harvard, they only let you do documentary. Now, I liked music videos and movies, and they were like, we're not doing that. We're just doing that. And at the time, I didn't like documentaries.
Right.
I was resisting it. But then I really sort of fell in love with documentaries. And I thought, you know what, these are actually interesting. You know,
Right.
Showtime started doing a lot of really great docs,
Right.
HBO. And so I kind of got into it, and we decided, you know what, we need a production company because we think we want to do docs and maybe do some narrative features as well.
Right.
So we created this company back in 2008, and it just kind of sat. We just let it sit, you know, because Jason was working at Discovery Channel. You know, I was actually at that point freelancing and doing all sorts of stuff, doing radio, etc. But we just kind of held on to it. But now, once we moved back to New York and I was at MSNBC, we decided we really wanted to lean in and do it. And so Jason runs the company. And I'm a partner in the company. And so the way that we've worked it is we kind of reversed the roles, right? So he's running the company, and now I'm what he was when he was at Discovery Channel, and I was the freelancer.
Right.
So we kind of flipped places. And so we're working on a bunch of projects right now. Our first big project is a documentary about Medgar Evers that we're doing as a partnership with the documentary group, which is actually Peter Jennings did the same thing that we did. Peter Jennings, when he was an anchor at ABC, formed a production company, and he unfortunately passed away. But his partner in that, Tom Yellen, now runs that production company. So that's the production company that was spawned from that. So that company and our company have partnered together. We're doing this documentary.
Wonderful.
We're doing podcasts. We're doing like all this great production stuff. And so the great thing about my role as the partner is I get to sit in the meeting and go, that's an amazing idea. That's awesome. I love it. I think I'll sign off, right? And Jason has to do all the work. So he's doing the hard work of running
See
the
what we mean about finding the right partner?
The right partner, right. Yeah. So he's
one that will do all the work.
and do all the work. But yeah, but it's great because he leans into what he, you know, is great at, which, you know, he is an editor by trade. And so he's got like all of the production skills. And it's funny because it actually came in really handy during the pandemic. Right? Because when our show launched, when I was, you know, handed the 7 o'clock hour at MSNBC, we were in the heart of the pandemic. This was in 2000. And no one was coming into work. Everything was shut down. So they actually launched the show in our basement. We had bought a home in, you know, in the Maryland, DC area. And they just, you know, threw up a prompter and a little background behind us, and we were in our unfinished basement. But luckily, my husband is a production guy.
Yeah.
And so he basically was like the shadow member of the readout team because he was able to do the stage managing, the lighting. I think I had the best lighting of everyone with a home studio. He had my lights perfect. He built like a little sort of stage set. We have a now whole completely done up set in the basement. And so he was able to like actually really help to make the, you know, the TV show, the MSNBC show better because he was willing to use his skills to help me. So it's like, we do that. We sort of have that yin and yang where we can, you know, work together on projects, whether they're the official NBC project or our projects that we're doing on the outside.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really amazing. So you are leveraging your platform, which you now have a huge platform, lots of fans. Every time I go to dinner with you, people are like, and then they invariably come over to the table. They assess the situation, like, and then they come over to the table.
I love that.
And they asked me to take a picture. They're like, "Here, can you take a picture of me, Joy?"
You're trying to take a picture with Tara. Let's just keep it real.
And I gladly take the picture because I love it. I love that for you. So, in terms of what advice do you have around leveraging? Like, so I think what a lot of people struggle with is they have the job that pays the bills, and then they have their passion right on the side. So how do you leverage your job that pays the bills, right? Well, I'm sure at this point the production company can pay the bills too, but how do you leverage that too, and what advice do you have for folks on leveraging that so that they can sort of have more of a symbiotic relationship between what they're doing to stabilize themselves financially and then their passion?
Well, I mean, for me, you know, the grounding for my brand right now obviously is the readout. It is the MSNBC show. So it's maximizing that, making sure it's as good as it possibly can be, as informative as it can possibly be. Because the things that come from that, you know, the book that I'm doing that's also a Medgar Evers project came from that, right? It's because of the TV show that I'm able to do that. And then when it comes to, for instance, the documentary, it's taking that same sort of reputational brand that you've built that gives you credibility and journalistic credibility that helps when you're trying to sell a documentary. So we'll lean into the way that we're pitching, the way that we're like sort of saying, this is why you should buy this documentary, because it's got the journalistic credibility of an MSNBC journalist. It's got the, you know, sort of productional capabilities of Jason, who's, you know, got a long history with with Discovery, et cetera. And so we're each taking the pieces of our brand that actually make sense for our outside projects. So we do another project called What to Read, because book nerd, you know, we might as well do a book spy.
And then the play on read.
And the play on read, you know, so it's like we just kind of take the things that we're each really great at, and we just sort of use that to sort of make the projects that we're doing a lot more scalable, first of all, because we can explain why we're capable of doing it, because we both have the production background, we both have, you know, the combination of journalism, editing, directing, etc., but also to make sure that it's credible and that people want it and they know we can actually fulfill the thing that we're actually pitching. We can do it.
So I'm going to deviate because you got me thinking. I'm thinking about things that I know people will probably want to know, right? So I know that one thing that comes to mind, because I have a great partner. I love my partner, my husband. But we don't do business together. Now,
you guys do something so different.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah.
I mean, but he helps, right? He comes to events and helps out and helps with the business. But we're not business partners, right?
Yeah.
So I'm speculating that people want to know, because you and Jason have a great marriage, right? So how do you work together? So I'm deviating from the prepared questions, but how do you maintain a great, loving marriage while being business partners?
Yeah. It is that is the challenge, right? But we've been doing it for so long, because remember, I mean, this goes back to like our early 20s when we were working on Video Doubly together. So we really kind of just work the same way, and we've created a working style. So when we're working. Like when we were working on the show, even after we started being a couple, like we weren't a couple on set. We weren't a couple out in the world. You know what I mean? We were a couple behind the scenes, and we keep the work.
Right.
When we're working, we're working. If we're in a business meeting, usually Jason's in the bay. That's where our sort of production space, and in our home, we have like a whole separate space with its own entrance, its own sort of world. Right. He's usually in that world, and I'm usually on my floor, where my office is, on the main floor, and we'll literally take the meeting in different rooms. We're not like literally sitting there together like we're a duo, you know?
Right.
We kind of really work when we're working, and then we hang out when we're hanging out. And so we just make sure we keep that delineation, because you really can't bring your couple stuff into your work stuff, because it won't work. And it'll mess up your work stuff. And it's like, I remember you didn't take out the trash last night. I'm gonna take it out on you in this meeting. And if you have that vibe, and it's just, we've always, I think, because we were friends first, we've always been able to fade right back into our kind of work mode when we needed to.
I really love the concept of creating a style, right? Like having a style, a work style, because I think people often don't sort of create processes around things, right? And so if you are a couple and you are doing business together, essentially what you're saying is you created a process, right? Of how you do things.
That's right.
And you have a style. There's a defined set of principles that govern how you work together. And I think people don't kind of take the time to do that.
Yeah.
And you would do that in any other work environment, but I think in when people are couples, sometimes they don't take the time to do that. I love the concept of you all being in different rooms, the same house in different rooms, taking the meeting. I just think that's really it's really great. So I hope everybody's getting all of these amazing jewels. So we don't have a ton of time left, so I want to be mindful of your time, busy lady. So I want to talk about, because you can't have Joy Reid on your podcast and not talk about politics. You just can't, even though you and I already started talking about But I want to talk about a little bit about some of the hot button issues, right? Especially as Black women and all the things that we have to navigate. And one thing, you and I had this conversation offline, but I'm going to bring it online, is affirmative action. And in particular, what's happening with the Fearless Fund. And so for people who may not be familiar with the situation, the Fearless Fund is a venture capital fund. And what venture capital funds do is they invest in startups, they invest in businesses and they invest in order to help those businesses scale and grow, right? So Fearless Fund is a venture capital fund founded by Black women. One of the co-founders is Keisha Knight Pulliam, the actress known from the Cosby Show. And they started a program, and the program was a grant program specifically for Black women entrepreneurs and startup founders. And so they are being sued right now by the guy, Edward Blum, who sued basically over affirmative action at Harvard, and he just sadly won his case and effectively has sort of gutted affirmative action. So now he's suing these women, these Black women co-founders of the Fearless Fund, and suing them, saying that they are discriminating against other groups by only giving grants to Black women startup founders. So, Joy, so I have so many questions to ask you about this, but the first question I have is, what can we do?
Yeah.
Because I feel this is clearly a strategy, and it's not going to stop here.
No.
Because it just keeps.
Well, and keep in mind that Ed Blum, before the current successful affirmative action case, did a previous affirmative action case from a young woman in Texas. I believe he tried to get into UT Austin. He did not win that case. And essentially, she didn't have a great application. She didn't get in, but she felt entitled, right? And he sued on her behalf. He came back again with this particular case with a court that is far more favorable, a 6-3 right-wing court created by Donald Trump. This is why voting matters. Elections matter, because who you put in can put in 3 Supreme Court justices, so keep that in mind. And so he knew he had a more favorable court. He's not just suing the Fearless Fund. He's now also launched a lawsuit against law schools, saying that law schools, by doing special programs to recruit Black law students, are discriminated against white men. Ed Blum essentially I will just describe him as somebody who believes that the true victims in American society are white men, and that white men must be protected from all of these Black and brown folk and Asian Americans and everyone else who isn't a straight white man needs to be protected from change, because there are changing demographics in the country that are going to leave this being a country without a racial majority. It's going to be a plurality country, and white Americans are not going to be the majority in another 20 years. And so ahead of that, he's trying to sort of create a special class of protection for white men to make sure that they still get, and let's just be clear, Black women get about 0.3%, I believe it's 0.13% of venture capital money right now. So if you're not getting, as a white man, venture capital money, it's not Black women taking it from you. Just like, in Harvard right now, he tried to use Asian Americans as the wedge. The incoming class at Harvard University is about 27% Asian. Asian Americans are about 5% of the population. Asian Americans are not being discriminated against at Harvard. The Harvard incoming population is maybe about 14% African American. That's about on track to our population. What he's angry about is that there are any programs at all, anywhere, whether it's in business or in education, that help Black folks, specifically Black folk, at all. And he never even had an Asian American plaintiff. So this is him. This is him saying that he is angry specifically at Black folks for having anything. And he's coming after everything. And the problem with him winning, one of the many problems with him winning, is number one, it's going to frighten a lot of corporate interests and a lot of finance interests who don't want the smoke, and who will say that the way to avoid a lawsuit from Ed Blum or some of the other interest groups that are along the same lines is to just not do much for Black people. And that is the end game. The end game for him is to say, we want you to have nothing. We want to make sure that you really become uncompetitive, because his concern is that down the road, as we become minority country, white folks who now get 99% will get 97%. And that is unacceptable. Unacceptable. So, I think there is a real risk here that venture capitalists will become nervous to fund anything like the Fearless Fund. And so I think the only thing that we can do is we have to be fearless on our own behalf. And organizations like the Fearless Fund, they've said this, the partners in this organization have come out very publicly, and we're trying to book them for the readout as well, and have said, no, we're going to keep doing this, because if we show fear, it's going to also allow the bigger venture cap funds to show fear as well.
Right.
And that is my concern, is that these affirmative action rulings, et cetera, will make it even harder for the group that has the hardest time raising venture capital fund and raising money at all, which is Black women, who are also the most entrepreneurial, percentage-wise, in terms of the number of businesses we start. But we start them undercapitalized, as you very well know.
Yes.
And then we have to operate them undercapitalized. And if Ed Blum gets his way, we'll be even more undercapitalized, and many of our businesses will fail. So I think what we have to do is we have to fight even harder, push even harder. If you've got a grant fund, give even more money. You can't sue everybody.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that's so disconcerting, is that it feels like, or maybe it doesn't feel like it is, that there's so many billionaires that will fund these racist conservative movements, but there doesn't seem to be enough people that are countering that or proactively pushing back against it, who are progressive-minded people. Like they're billionaires, but there's not as many, whereas there seems to be just this sort of glut of billionaires that are just waiting to find any kind of movement to support white supremacy, right? And there's no counter. There's not the same counterweight to it from the left, frankly, right?
Well, I mean, the challenges that we have in this country is, number one, there's always been an impatience with Black progress and a resistance to Black progress. People's patience with Reconstruction lasted about 12 years before the white folks said, we've done enough for y'all. I know you had 246 years of slavery, but enough is enough. How much do you want, right? I mean, we're taking our troops out of the South. Protect yourself, you'll be fine, right? 12 years, that's all we got of Reconstruction. And then, we got another 80 years of discrimination and Jim Crow. And then we had to fight tooth and nail just to get moderate whites to say, okay, fine, we'll help you. Right. So there's a lot of impatience with the Black struggle, which is like the fundamental struggle, other than indigenous people in this country. And so, there's no patience with them either getting, They're like, maybe some casinos, please leave us alone.
Yes, exactly.
And so there's not a lot of patience. That's number one. And then number two, you have to understand that billionaires writ large, and I'm not saying all billionaires are bad people, but writ large, what is their
But every bad person's a billionaire. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I'm not, it's not that all billionaires are, horrible people who want white supremacy, but white supremacy is very convenient to what they do want, which is more money and less taxes. Right. And so think about it. What is more in their benefit in the end? If you have more white supremacist beliefs and you have more white supremacist institutions, you're going to have people whose attitude is to vote Republican, and whose want is to vote Republican and to vote for tax cuts for them. And so creating an atmosphere where people want to cut their taxes, even though it doesn't help the person who's voting for the tax cuts, creating that atmosphere is good for them. So if you have people fighting against DEI, if you have people freaked out about trans kids, there's like faux trans kids in the whole state of Utah, they passed a whole law about it. If you have people flipping out about diversity and inclusion and critical race theory and all these things that are not really impacting them, but if they're angry about it, it's going to push them into a space where they're going to vote for the party that cuts billionaires' taxes. That's why there are not a lot of billionaires on the other side. There's not a lot of billionaires that are going to do the things that make the taxes go up. And liberalism, progressivism, wokeism tends to also be associated with increasing rich people's taxes. So the problem,
which is why I support it.
No, and actually, and the reality is, I mean, if you think about it, I was talking with somebody today at 30 Rock about the fact that, the so-called Social Security crisis is not a crisis of Social Security itself. It's a crisis of the cap on the amount of taxes that we take from folks' checks for Social Security. It's capped at $119,000 or so. And that's whether you earn $100,000, $200,000, $2 million, or $1 billion. Your taxes on Social Security are capped right here. And so, if you just raised it by $20, $30, $40, $100,000, and you said, Jeff Bezos, you got to pay on the first $200,000 of your billions of dollars income, we wouldn't have Social Security. We don't have it's all created. The poverty that we see in this country, the want we see in this country, it's all manufactured. It doesn't have to be that way. It's that way because people are making choices. So I think what we have to do on the other side is also make choices. And make choices that are political choices that have the end result of saying, no, billionaires, you gotta pay more. You know, you got to pay more, you got to kick in more, you're getting a lot out of the society. And this country is going to be majority non-white. And you need to deal with that. You need to grow up and live with it. And that means that you have to empower people of color. Because people of color are going to be the majority. And you want that majority to be educated. You want that majority to have enough money to be consumers if you want the economy to survive. You want those people to actually feel like they have a stake in the country so you don't have civil war. And if you want to fight Black and brown and Asian American people, you're going to be fighting the majority, and not in 100 years, in 20. Because 5-year-olds are already majority non-white. If you're 5 right now, your age group is already majority non-white. If you're 15 right now, your age group is already majority non-white. It's here. It's not in the future. It's when that 15-year-old can vote. That group of people are already majority non-white, which means Republicans, you're not gonna be able to win elections unless you suppress a lot of votes. And so we're coming to a place where we're gonna have to choose between democracy and fascism, because democracy is going to produce more and more progressive results over time. And fascism is gonna be the only alternative. So I think what we have to do is always be in fighting mode, whether you're at the Fearless Fund, whether you're at a law school, you need to fight like they're fighting. Ruthlessly. We're going to continue to do these programs to bring in Black and brown people. We're going to continue to give to these businesses because that is what's going to grow our economy. And if y'all want to sue us, good luck to you and go straight to hell.
No, you're right. And I'm so glad to hear that the Fearless Fund is not backing down. I didn't think they would, but I'm glad.
They're called the Fearless Fund.
Exactly. But I'm glad to hear that they're being so vocal about that they're not going to back down, because they're right. It's going to send a chilling effect 100%. Across everything. And so, you know, I'm thinking here, maybe I should come up with some sort of grant myself, right? You know, like come up with a grant, because more people should do that. So I want to get into some of the questions that were sent in, because we're going to wrap up, even though I'm having a great time. It doesn't even feel like we're taping anything, as usual in my conversation.
Exactly. It's like our phone calls, but they're on this camera.
Our phone calls on the yellow sofa on camera. So I think one of the things that, you know, people are very interested, you know, we talked about in the beginning of more about your personal story, right? And I learned a lot of new things today about you and your background. But I think folks are always interested in that. And I also covered all the sort of professional questions. But so what's one thing that people get wrong about Joy Reid?
That people get wrong. Oh, well, one of the things people do say about me is that I think people don't think that I actually know any Republicans. I think what they get wrong is they think that I live in a bubble of a bunch of liberal, woke Democrats. My late father, who, you know, he didn't live with us and we didn't have like a great relationship. He wasn't a great father, but he was a Reaganite, like a conservative, right-wing Republican. You know, he was an American citizen. So had he been an American citizen, he would have 100% been a Republican. He rooted for Reagan. My mother rooted for Carter. The marriage didn't work out for many reasons, but that was one of them. They were very different. And I know lots of Republicans. I have friends that are Republicans, plenty of them. And so I don't exist in the bubble people think I do. I actually talk to, on a regular basis, many, many Republicans, and I have relationships across those aisles. It's like people, you know, think, oh, well, you dislike cops. No, I got cops in my family. You know what I mean? So I think people think I live in a bubble that I really don't live in. I actually live in quite a very diverse, ideologically, racially diverse world. And so my insights about Republicans are not because I don't like Republicans, it's because I actually do know them better than they think that I do.
So there you have it. Joy Reid has Republican friends. So let's see. All right, so this question is mine, but I think people will want to know this. So you and I have gone out a few times. We both enjoy a nice cocktail.
Yes.
What's your favorite cocktail?
Prosecco and Saint Germain, hands down. And so I started drinking this. Jackie Reid, my play cousin, who did the Read That podcast. She is the one who turned me on to it. So we were out at Del Frisco's Grill, and she orders this amazing drink, this Prosecco and Saint Germain, and I've been hooked on it ever since. I mean, I'm so hooked on it. Sometimes Saint Germain sends me Saint Germain because I've said it so many times. It is so good. It's so refreshing and light. It's a perfect, especially for summer. When you want something light, you can throw a little lime in it, and it's just a refreshing, wonderful drink. And sometimes I now have, in addition to it, I'll throw a splash of plum wine in it. Listen, baby, this is the drink. It's a Prosecco and Saint Germain with a splash of plum wine. Fabulous.
I love it because I love anything with Prosecco myself.
Yes.
I am a champagne gal, so
Yes,
or
yes.
bubbly gal.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. How much time do we have, Assange?
We're on 45 minutes.
Okay, all right. So edit that part out, or not. Free flowing, keep it in. Yeah. So it looks like we are at time, and we promised that we would get Joy Reid out on time. So I'm sorry I couldn't take more of your questions and ask her more of your questions, but I think some of them overlap with my questions, so y'all got covered. Okay?
Yeah, you covered.
But so one last thing. So I want you to share before we close out. We want to close out on some inspiration because that's part of what we're looking to achieve here. Is if you could share your best piece of inspirational advice. And in the context, again, we're very focused here on wealth creation, particularly for women of color, Black women, but your best advice, inspirational advice around how people can get to where they want to be, whether it be professionally or as an entrepreneur, whatever that category that falls into for them in their professional life.
Well, I mean, the best piece of advice that I was ever given was that if you can't win if you don't show up, right? The first way to lose is just not be there. So, whatever it is that you want to do, you need to show up for it, right? And then when you show up, you can't win if you're not prepared. If you do those two things, just show up. That is literally 80% of the battle. I think for a lot of people, they say, I want to be a writer, but they never write.
Wow.
They say, I want to be, an airline pilot, but they never take the class.
Right.
Right? You're saying, I want to be a track star, but they never go to the track. But Sha'Carri Richardson, right? People trying to hate on her. Who was the fastest woman in the world?
Right.
Sha'Carri. You know why? She showed up at the track.
Right.
Right?
And she was prepared.
And so it's like, show up and prepared. It literally gets you 80% of the way there. And then the rest of it is a mix of luck.
Yeah.
Knowing the right people. Another great piece of advice that I was given is, and it's a reverse of what people usually say, it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Wow.
You think about it.
Wow.
Right?
Right.
You can know a lot of people. You can be
Right.
like, hey, I know George, right?
Right.
But George says, oh, hey, where are you from?
Yep.
You know him. Does he know you?
Right.
So make sure that the people you need know you.
Well, that's a word to end on. So thank you so much, Joy Reid.
Thank you,
This
my
was
friend.
amazing. Thank you for coming, trekking out to the great city of Jersey City. Although we do call it the sixth borough.
It's, you know what? I love it. This is my first time really spending any amount of time in Jersey City, and I love it.
Oh,
I'm going to go back and be a big Jersey City booster.
Woo woo. So hopefully we can get you back.
Absolutely.
Get you back.
For
All right.
you, Tara, anything.
Oh, thank you. So that's all we have, folks. But I hope that you were inspired. I hope that you are motivated. I hope that you took notes. If you didn't, watch again and take notes. And then I want you to execute, because there were so many really great pieces of advice from Joy Reid, as I knew they would be, which is why I wanted her to be our very first guest.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you.